The prairie lay vast and breathing beneath a sun that bled into the horizon. The wagon train had stopped for the evening, its circle drawn tight as if to ward off the emptiness. Elias Morrow felt the stillness differently that night, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The men spoke in murmurs. The women gathered the children close, and somewhere beyond the tall grass came a sound too rhythmic to be wind. Drums, distant, hollow, and patient. Clara's hands trembled as she struck a match for the cook fire. Even Captain Drayton, who trusted only what could be ordered, stared westward with an unease he refused to name. When the drums faded, the silence that followed was worse. It was Samuel Pike who first whispered, "They're closer than before," and no one dared tell him he was wrong. The night deepened until the stars felt too near, as though they watched instead of shone. Captain Drayton ordered double guards, but the men obeyed in silence. Elias walked the perimeter, boots sinking in soft earth, his mind circling the same question. What do drums mean when there are no campfires to see? Clara hummed a hymn to calm the children, her voice fragile yet defiant. Samuel counted each flicker of torchlight, half convinced each one would vanish. Somewhere beyond, a coyote called, and from farther still, the answering rhythm began again. Before midnight, the wind changed. Smoke drifted low and slow, though no fire had spread. Captain Drayton's horse shifted nervously. The animal sensed what the men would not. Clara watched Elias from afar, her hands clasped tight in prayer. Samuel dreamed of home, but awoke to the rhythm of thunder that wasn't thunder. The sound came closer. Steady, unhurried, as if marking time until courage broke. By dawn, the drums ceased. The silence that followed was a wound, raw and deliberate. The settlers emerged from their wagons as if from graves, unsure whether to trust the daylight. Clara searched the horizon, her expression brittle with exhaustion. Elias found tracks near the creek, moccasin prints light and deliberate, circling the camp. "They've seen us," he muttered, and from somewhere in the high grass, unseen eyes watched him back. That evening, a storm rolled in, black and green against the dying light. The settlers moved with rehearsed fear, stowing gear, tying tarps, whispering prayers. Elias looked west once more and saw the faint shimmer of torches on the horizon. The drums began again, slower, heavier, as though the land itself had taken up the rhythm. Clara grasped his arm. "Elias," he whispered, "it's begun." He didn't answer. He only listened to the drums, to the wind, to the memory of silence that would soon be gone. By sunrise, cavalry flags shimmered like phantom colors through the haze. Captain Drayton's men rode in formation, steel and dust moving as one. Their arrival brought no comfort, only the illusion of safety. Elias stood by the wagons, jaw clenched as the captain dismounted, boots grinding into dry earth. "This territory is under army protection now," Drayton declared, though his eyes betrayed doubt. Clara watched from a distance, her hands folded around her rosary, the beads cold as bone. Samuel stared in awe at the soldiers' discipline, unaware that order could be its own kind of cage. Beyond the ridge, unseen but ever present, Wakon's gaze followed them all. The drums had stopped, not in surrender, but in anticipation. The council was called at noon beneath a stand of cottonwoods by the creek. Wakon came forward alone, his posture unyielding, his presence commanding. Elias translated with care, voice steady despite the soldiers' impatience. Wakon spoke of promises broken, treaties carved in words the wind had carried away. Drayton's reply was curt, diplomatic in sound but hollow in spirit. "Peace requires trust," he said. Wakon's answer came quiet as thunder. "Then you have already lost it." As twilight fell, uneasy laughter rose from the soldiers' campfires. The settlers kept apart, whispering of omens and old fears. Samuel sat near the edge of camp, carving a piece of wood into the shape of a horse, trying to ignore the rhythmic beat of his own heart. Clara played a slow tune on her violin, the melody fragile and yearning, a bridge over the dark gulf growing between men. Elias watched the horizon where the smoke of another fire curled upward. "They're waiting," he murmured. Drayton didn't answer. He was already writing his report. Night deepened, and with it, the whispers. A scout returned, trembling, claiming to have seen riders on the northern ridge. Drayton dismissed it as nerves, yet ordered his men to ready their rifles. Elias walked alone to the edge of the encampment, where the moonlight painted the grass silver. He could see them. Faint silhouettes watching from afar, motionless, eternal. The wind carried a single drum beat, one note, then silence. It was not a threat. It was a warning. At dawn, the treaty was signed. Ink on parchment, faith on borrowed time. Drayton pressed his seal into the wax as if to anchor truth by force. Joachim accepted the paper without bowing, folding it once before tucking it into his belt. "The earth remembers what men forget," he said quietly. Elias watched, knowing that words written on windless paper would never still the drums beneath the soil. As Joachim turned to leave, the rising sun caught the edge of his blade, flashing once. Not as threat, but as prophecy. By the third night, the prairie no longer slept. The drums began again, faint, distant, and maddeningly steady. Each beat carried through the grass like a living thing, wrapping the camp in dread. Elias Morrow walked among the wagons, torchlight etching lines of exhaustion across his face. Clara's violin lay silent now. Even music felt like a betrayal of the silence that fear demanded. Captain Drayton barked, orders no one believed in. Samuel Pike clutched his carving knife, not as a tool but as protection. Across the dark horizon, unseen fires flickered, too far to fight, too close to forget. In that space between sound and silence, the settlers began to realize they were not surrounded by enemies. They were surrounded by consequence. The cavalry's horses grew restless, stamping and snorting as the drums grew nearer. Clara tended to the children, whispering prayers that felt smaller with each word. Captain Drayton stood atop a wagon wheel, scanning the horizon through his spyglass. "They're testing us," he muttered. Elias stood beside him, silent, unwilling to name the truth neither man wished to speak. That courage had begun to rot into panic. Somewhere beyond sight, Joachim lifted his hand to the stars, speaking to spirits older than memory. The drums halted suddenly. In their place came whispers, strange, faint, and near. A shadow moved through the tall grass, then vanished. One soldier fired blindly, and the night exploded into chaos. Horses reared, women screamed, and fire leapt from a fallen lantern. The wagons became silhouettes of panic. Elias shouted for order, his voice lost in the storm of confusion. Smoke clawed at the sky as the first embers drifted upward, glowing like souls rising from the earth. By dawn, the fire was contained but not forgotten. Ash drifted like black snow over the camp. Samuel Pike sat alone beside the charred remains of a wagon, carving another figure. This one unfinished. Captain Drayton paced before his men, his voice low and dangerous. "From now on," he said, "we shoot first." Clara watched him with quiet horror, knowing those words would write the next tragedy before it ever happened. Elias met her gaze across the smoldering field, and in that moment both understood. The line between protector and destroyer had vanished. That night, the drums changed. No longer distant, they came in waves, urgent, unified, alive. The prairie answered with wind and thunder, as if the heavens themselves kept rhythm. Elias stood atop a wagon, scanning the dark horizon, his heart pounding to the same relentless beat. Clara's candle burned low, flickering in the draft. Samuel whispered, "They're calling someone." And deep beyond the grasslands, where firelight shimmered on painted shields, Joachim struck his drum once, the sound echoing through the night like prophecy made flesh. The dawn came blood-red, a sky that looked more like a wound than a promise. A cavalry patrol rode out before the sun had cleared the horizon, rifles slung low, their laughter brittle and forced. Elias Morrow watched them go, knowing something in the air had shifted. Clara begged him to stop them, but he only shook his head. They won't listen to me anymore. Hours passed before the riders returned, or rather, what was left of them. 3 men, pale and trembling, their faces painted with dust and horror. They spoke of a hunt gone wrong, of shadows that struck like ghosts. Elias didn't need to ask what had truly happened. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the drums had stopped again. And that silence carried grief far older than any treaty. When the truth came, it came heavy and unadorned. The patrol had found a Lakota hunting party. Men, women, children. Startled, frightened, one soldier had fired. The rest had followed. Now Drayton's camp sat in stunned quiet, the air thick with guilt and smoke. Elias stared at the ground where the blood-streaked horses stood, his stomach hollow. "You didn't lose men," he said softly. "You made enemies." Drayton's jaw tightened. "You think they'll let us walk away?" Elias didn't answer. Both men already knew the answer. That night, thunder rolled from the west. The settlers huddled in silence as the first drops of rain fell, each one hissing against dying campfires. Samuel Pike sat beside Clara, both listening to the sky rumble. "Is it them?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "It's the earth crying." From the ridge, Wakan watched lightning split the clouds. In his hand, the treaty parchment unfurled, its words blurring in the rain until only the seal remained. He raised his drum and struck once, the sound echoing through the storm like judgment. Elias woke before dawn to the sound of distant thunder that was not thunder. Fires burned on the western horizon, dozens of them. The drums had returned, not in warning, but in mourning. Captain Drayton barked commands, forming his men into lines, their rifles gleaming in the flickering firelight. Clara gathered what she could carry, her hands shaking. "Elias," she whispered. "The circle's broken." He looked out toward the horizon, his face set like stone. "It's been broken for a long time." By sunrise, the prairie trembled beneath hoofbeats. A line of riders appeared through the smoke, Wakan at their head, his drums slung at his side, his expression calm as death. The soldiers took aim, and for a moment time held its breath. Elias raised his hand, shouting for peace, but the command came too late. The first shot cracked the dawn open, and with it, the last fragments of diplomacy shattered. The drums roared to life once more, no longer distant but all around, echoing through the soil, the air, the bones of every man alive. The sun climbed slow and merciless over the smoldering prairie. Smoke coiled through the air like restless spirits, and the settlers' camp had become a fortress of fear. The wagons were drawn into a circle, rifles stacked, ammunition counted, prayers whispered between clenched teeth. Elias Morrow moved among the people, steady but hollow-eyed, his voice quiet yet commanding. Clara bandaged the wounded in silence, her hands trembling but precise. Captain Drayton stood apart, studying maps that no longer meant anything. The drums beat without pause, their rhythm rising with the wind, until even the earth seemed to shudder beneath the sound. The day would stretch long. A single, endless hour between breath and death. By afternoon, the drums fell silent, replaced by the eerie cry of wind over scorched grass. The men waited, rifles pointed toward the horizon, every sound magnified in the stillness. Samuel Pike crouched beside Elias, clutching a revolver too large for his hand. "I ain't afraid," he whispered. Elias didn't answer. He knew fear wasn't the enemy now. Exhaustion was. Across the plain, figures flickered through the haze, appearing and vanishing like ghosts. They were waiting too, listening, deciding. Captain Drayton's patience broke before sunset. "If they won't come to us, we'll go to them," he barked. He ordered a volley fired into the horizon, blind anger disguised as strategy. The shots rang out, echoing across the plains like insults to the gods. For a moment, nothing moved. Then came the answer. A swarm of arrows arcing from the distant grass, whispering through the air like the sighs of the dead. Elias dove for cover, dragging Samuel down beside him as the first arrows thudded into wood. Clara screamed as one tore through her sleeve, grazing her arm. The long dusk had begun. As the sun dipped low, the air thickened with ashen screams. Drayton's men fired wildly now, smoke blinding their aim. Elias ran from wagon to wagon, shouting for calm, his throat raw from shouting. Clara tore strips of fabric for the wounded, her face pale beneath the grime. Samuel reloaded trembling hands, his youthful courage cracking. Through the chaos came a single haunting sound. Walken's drum, closer than ever, each beat timed with the flash of lightning over the horizon. It was no longer war. It was reckoning. Night came heavy and slow, draped in smoke and the scent of burning canvas. The drums faded, replaced by distant cries and the crackle of dying fires. The survivors huddled together in what was left of the camp. Elias sat alone at the edge of the circle, staring into the darkness where the plains met the sky. Clara joined him, laying a hand on his arm. "Will it end?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "It already has." Over the ridge, Wakan watched in silence, his drum resting beside him, the stars reflected in his eyes. Between them, the prairie held its breath, an endless twilight where victory meant nothing at all. The night opened with fire. Flames raced through the prairie grass, chasing the wind, turning the land into a living torch. Elias Morrow awoke to the crack of rifle fire and the scream of terrified horses. The enemy had come like a storm, silent, swift, unrelenting. He grabbed his rifle and ran it into the smoke, calling Clara's name, his voice swallowed by the roar of burning grass. Captain Drayton shouted commands that vanished beneath chaos, his once sharp discipline breaking apart in the heat. Warwolf, and beyond it all, silhouetted against the inferno, Wakan moved like a phantom, his drum slung across his chest, his expression solemn as he called upon spirits older than the sky itself. Captain Drayton fought to rally what was left of his men. "Hold the line!" he roared, though there was no line left to hold. Arrows sliced through the firelight, cutting men down before their screams could rise. Elias saw Drayton stumble, clutching his chest, blood blooming across his uniform like a spreading shadow. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Two men crushed beneath the same folly. Drayton's sword fell from his hand, sinking into the mud as his body followed. For the first time, Elias felt no anger, only sorrow. The war had become nothing but memory burning in the dark. Clara Morrow fled through the firelit grass, clutching her skirts, calling out for Elias. Her lungs burned with smoke, her tears streaking paths through soot. She stumbled upon Samuel Pike, half conscious and bleeding, his leg pinned beneath a broken wagon wheel. "Don't leave me," he gasped. She tore at the wood with her bare hands until he was free, then pulled him toward the creek as fire closed in behind them. The drums grew louder, not war drums now, but mourning. Clara stopped, listening, the sound pulling her gaze toward the ridgeline where Wakan's silhouette loomed against the flames. Elias reached the creek's edge, coughing, his clothes scorched, his heart hammering like the drum itself. Across the shallow water stood Wakan, framed by flame and moonlight. Neither spoke at first, the silence between them heavier than any weapon. "This didn't have to happen," Elias said. Wakan's voice was low, resolute. "It already happened, long before you came." He lifted the drum, striking once, the sound deep, mournful, final. Elias raised his rifle, but his hands shook, and the weapon never fight. The fire roared around them, a crown of fury over the prairie's endless sorrow. When the fire finally began to die, the land lay in ruin. The smoke drifted east, carrying with it the scent of ash and memory. Clara found Elias kneeling in the mud, the rifle forgotten beside him. Wakan had vanished into the mist beyond the creek. The drums were gone. Only the wind remained, soft, weary, forgiving. Samuel lay nearby, breathing shallow but alive. Elias looked to the horizon, where the first gray light of dawn began to rise. "The fire's gone out," Clara whispered. He nodded, eyes distant. "No," he said quietly. "It's just moved on." The first dawn after the fire was quiet as a grave. The prairie stretched endlessly, scarred black and silver, smoke curling from scattered embers. Elias Morrow walked slowly among the ruins, counting the wagons, the bodies, the lives that had vanished like smoke into the sky. Clara followed closely, her hand brushing his sleeve, each touch a fragile tether to the world that remained. Samuel Pike trailed behind, small and hollow-eyed, tracing the charred prints of horses and footsteps across the mud. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Wakan watched in silence, his drum untouched now, his gaze tracing the survivors as if marking their passage from one world into another. The survivors gathered by the creek, washing faces and hands in cold, flowing water. The moment was fragile, a pause in the storm of loss that had consumed them. Elias knelt, looking into the reflection of the water, seeing the exhaustion and guilt mirrored back. Clara whispered prayers, small words for the dead, for the living, for the land that had borne witness to their suffering. Samuel scooped water over his head, shivering, as if baptism could erase memory. The prairie around them was silent, but in its quiet, the echo of the drums still lingered. Faint, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat beneath the soil. Wakan moved quietly along the ridgeline, leaving the survivors to their fragile peace. His eyes traced the burned landscape, reading it like a ledger of memory and vengeance. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. He paused, raised his drum, and struck a single note, low, deep, and resonant. It was a farewell, a warning, a lament. The sound carried across the prairie, reaching Elias and Clara, threading itself through the morning air. Though invisible, the weight of that note pressed upon them, a reminder that the past would always linger in the soil and the wind. By mid-morning, the survivors began to move, gathering what remained of their belongings. Elias led, careful but unsteady, every step heavy with memory. Clara stayed close, offering comfort in silence. Samuel ran ahead at times, chasing birds or shadows as if daring the world to forget him. The prairie seemed indifferent, stretching endlessly into sky and wind. But Elias felt its gaze upon them, a patient, eternal witness. Though the drums were gone, their echoes persisted in the sway of the grass, the whisper of the wind, the rhythm of their hearts. As the sun dipped toward evening, Elias, Clara, and Samuel paused atop a gentle rise, looking back at the burned circle of their world. The wind carried a faint memory of the drums, almost lost but impossible to ignore. Elias laid a hand on Samuel's shoulder, feeling the boy's trembling beneath his fingers. Clara rested her head against Elias, exhausted, grieving yet alive. The prairie stretched on endlessly, indifferent yet eternal, holding the story of fire, blood, and survival. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in silence and shadow, Wakan watched, the last drumbeat fading into memory, leaving only echoes of what had been and what would never be forgotten.